Yeah, so the journey to open science. So I'm teaching here at a university hospital, one of the largest in Europe, the Charité in Berlin. But that's not how I started. So actually, that I'm sitting here is kind of related to this open science journey, because when I did a lot of cognitive neuroscience back in the days and did teaching in psychology, just as Gillard did, and there was like I think 6-7 years ago, and we thought, okay, let's hop on this train of open science and making things more transparent, and we designed a course and at our department to incorporate this into at least the master's studies for cognitive neuroscience. Yes, and apparently students liked it, and from there on, as you know, most academic positions are not permanent in the beginning, but this kind of gave me the opportunity to here apply for a position at the BIH Quest Center for Responsible Research for actually driving educational formats, which was then a permanent position. So apparently, career-wise, jumping on the open science train did a lot more to my career than studying conformity in humans.
Awesome, thank you so much. Should we go with you, Erik?
Sure, I'm following the lead. I just do what I'm told. No, yeah, well, I think like if you want to go back to the roots, it's of course it started with the replication crisis for me, as I assume it did with many other people, right? As a PhD student in 2011, 2012, it was kind of shocking what was happening then, right? So I knew when I started teaching that I have to say something about replications at least, right? As kind of a minimum. And it's impossible, like Gilad said, also to open any textbook without raising an eyebrow now and then and thinking like, do I really believe in this? And what can I say about this to the students, right? So that's something that I think I've done ever since I started teaching, is to talk about the replication crisis as a minimum of things, and now I'm like trying to build on that, and been very inspired by Gilad's work also. That's the next level, I think, to get to the stage where he is at right now.
All right, thank you so much, Erik. Nora, could you tell us a little bit about how you got started with open science as a master's student?
Yes, hi everybody. I think I have to thank Julien for bringing this idea up, and also Natalia, my other advisor for my master's. I knew that I came into my master in Norway. It's a 2-year master, and I came in knowing that I wanted or would like to work with them, and they brought up the idea of open science and registered reports, and I blissfully ignorant said yes for sure, and took it upon. But now I think it's I'm really thankful for that experience, because it makes sense to me. And now I guess like jumping into this field when we have a known replicability crisis, and that yeah, open science makes it seems really intuitive to me. So really thankful that this is kind of where I'm starting. This is the kind of the outset of all my research I would like to do.
Awesome. Yeah, I think your experience will be really valuable for other PhD students or master students who are thinking about going for things like registered reports. Perfect. Thank you so much. If we can get a little bit more specific, are there any specific hands-on practices that you've used in your courses, Løhre, Erik, or do you focus on like general principles of open science? Then we can just go with the same order.
Yeah, so I'm at the BIH Quest Center for Responsible Research, so we go a bit beyond open science, which is part of what we call responsible research. So the aim is to make research more trustworthy, more useful for scientists and society, and ethically conducted as well. So this is kind of a bit of a package that we try to implement in our courses. We're currently and the problem that we have is that we are such a large institution, and we have to educate medical doctoral students, and we try to educate them. But at our institutions, we have 1,000 doctoral students registering per year. So you cannot teach them in a seminar format. This is just not possible. And so the learnings that we have is that we have several formats that we try now. One is a very much blended learning format, with lots of online content for the masses, to say. And then we have very targeted formats, like we have a summer school where we can, of course, admit once a year 60 students for very much in depth, but we don't know yet what is actually making a difference to put something into practice. This is kind of one of the research questions that we have currently. What kind of educational formats are suited to actually for these things to go into practice? And I think Gilad has shown very, very nicely how this can be done, how this can be transformed into practice. But for a lot of formats, we don't know. And it's also would be interesting to know from Gilad if he knows whether his students continue to do this, and whether the future products of his students will be as open and as transparent as he would wish this to be. Perhaps, I mean, you're still here, perhaps you can even chime in and give us some information on this.
Perfect, thank you so much. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and an interesting point to know what are the outcomes of this, right? It's not too much out there on that. If I'm jumping in, as I already did, I'll say that I have always talked about replications, as I mentioned. I took over, or actually I have a statistics course kind of here at BI, and I think I have some similar issues as you're mentioning, Ulf, with class sizes. For instance, we have approximately 600 bachelor students spread across 4 campuses with different teachers. So I think it's important to be aware of the sort of structural limitations and what you can do with such class sizes. But for sure, when I'm teaching statistics, I want to talk about topics like effect sizes, and that's not like it's not necessarily an open science only topic, but it's a topic that's been neglected, right? And that I think has become much more understood how important it is to talk about this and not only the p-value, right? So effect sizes, power analysis, and they don't know about it before. It's they've had the statistics course before, but it's the first time that they hear about effect sizes and power. So I think that's interesting. And I've also tried or started now to integrate replications in the statistics course. So basically, kind of a small scale version of what Gilad is doing in Hong Kong. They are not involved in the design process then, but they get a pre-made Qualtrics survey. We collect the data among them, and they share it with friends and family, and we analyze the data together. So at least they get like a beginning of a glimpse into the process. And I think it's a good way to introduce it to bachelor students at the business school. That's what I've thought so far.
Perfect. Thank you, Erik. Nora, I'm curious. I obviously know you've used the register report format in your thesis, but could you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Yeah. So I guess again I will point to Julien and Natalia, who gave me the opportunity and were willing to offer the chance to do so. But I guess for me, I approached early, like in the first year, and as they were open to this, and as I was open to this, I think from a student's perspective, I know many people think they come to class and they have this semester, and then they come back after the first summer break, and they're kind of starting fresh again. And for me, this summertime ended up being a chance for us to wait for responses back from reviewers. But I think from a student's perspective, or for professors not to discount that students might be interested in at least spending a little bit of time during the summer to write. And I think like this amount of time was really valuable also to just think through the process. And getting into the registered report, of course, it's a huge learning curve, and like how to submit a stage 1 when you have never heard of what an org ID is before, and like how to choose reviewers, what is this, learning how to search for questions. And I think I was really grateful for my advisors, but also being able to ask these questions and professors to offer up that students might be interested in putting in more than just the required coursework. Because I think also the threshold for going from being a student to all of a sudden, even from master to PhD, there it seems like this big gap. And how do you go from kind of hopping onto other projects to creating your own? And I think this was really a great chance for me to see that it exists and to try to kind of fall forward, if I can say, and to understand as I go along the way, with having kind of a low risk trial and error, and using this time that I have set aside to be a student for my master to try and to Google and to receive error messages every time I try to submit something because I haven't filled in half the boxes. Like, this is part of the process. I feel like it was really nice to have time to do.
Awesome. And I'm curious, do you then send the whole thing except the results to the evaluators, and then they approve everything, like the design and everything you've proposed before you collect data?
Yeah, so you're talking about the registered report in relation to the master thesis?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing is I submitted essentially the registered report, and then I wrote a bit more of the background for the introduction. And then I ended up gathering preliminary data. So I ended up gathering for quite a few, ended up being participants, but just wrote in a caveat that, as this is ongoing and as this is part of a bigger project with a publication, that these are my results so far. And I think maybe we'll go into it a bit later, but I think it's really valuable and really important as a student jumping into this space now to realize that, like, I think we are going from a time where answers are have the most weight, to the fact that your questions weigh just as much as your answers, especially in this age of information where it's really easy to search. But we as students nowadays are learning what to search for, how to search, to ask these questions, and what stands behind your question, and why, your reasoning behind asking these questions. So I think a registered report is a really good chance to kind of put this in practice right away, and to stand behind your question rather than your answer. So in submitting my thesis, I was really confident into why we had the amount of participants we did. It's not really part of registered report, but I ended up using Bayesian statistics for my results, which ends up you don't have a p-value, and kind of, if you have to learn how to argue for why you set up the question, your answer isn't the only thing that your thesis is standing on. So I thought this was really valuable as well.
So thank you so much. And of course, we have to talk about the challenges too, right? And I think all of you have already kind of set the stage for that. So we're just going to dive into that. What do you see as, if we start with you, Ulf, again, what do you see as some of the main challenges in teaching open science?
Yeah, shall I start?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So only using the term open science may already cause allergic reactions to faculty members at Charité, because at a university hospital, as you can imagine, lots of data cannot be shared openly. It's also, as Garrett shows, as already mentioned in the chat, the data is kind of, there's a strong tendency to own the data. So the data is owned by the principal investigator, and sharing this data is sometimes very, very complicated, and particularly when it comes to patient data. This is a chapter where a lot of people already work on how to accomplish this, but we cannot just say it's open science. And open science very often also by saying we will open up everything else, there will be thousands and thousands of arguments with IP and whatever. So we refrain from using the term open science, even though there's a lot of open science in what we do. So we rather have to say where we want to make it as transparent as possible. So transparency is one of the things, and encourage people to have structures to make something open upon, let's say, a mouse click, and enable them also to do this. So this is what we try to do in our educational programs, and also to sensitize people to that openness, that data that is just open is also not enough. There has to be metadata behind it. And if you take the spectrum from a clinical trial to a single cell line experiment with an immortalized cell line, you don't want to publish all the data because you will every openness is not per se a sign of quality, and this has to also be kind of thought about in these processes. So how can we advance knowledge and advance science in a sensible way? And this is what we have to teach also in our courses, to kind of get this feeling a bit that openness is not everything, but quality is starts at very, very early, even earlier than opening up your data. And rather an open protocol in my field is creates a lot more value to the scientific community than the actual resulting data.
That's a very interesting point, actually. That it's not only about sharing your data, but there's so much else that needs to be packed in there to make sure that the work is reproducible, for example. Erik, what do you see as, have you experienced any real challenges, anything that students are like, I'm not sure about that, like very skeptical about?
I think that for me, the challenge of teaching at the business school, where we have, now I'm talking specifically at the bachelor level, where we have a lot of students who are trying to get into maybe HR. It's a bachelor in HR and organizational psychology. Many of them have no interest in becoming academics. So then there's an issue of prioritization, right? What kind of open science concepts or practices or whatever will be relevant for them to use in an applied context? Or what kind of concepts can be most helpful for them, right? And I think that there's lots of things that are very helpful. I think just to get back to the point of knowing about the replication crisis and knowing that when you are going to implement something in the workplace, some kind of research-based practice, think about it with a skeptical eye, right? Or have at least some, put some question marks to it, right? So I think that's this is not like reactions from students, but these are things that I think about and that I think one has to take into concern when one is teaching, because we have a contract with the students. What are they here to learn, and what can we reasonably teach them without breaching the contract, sort of, right? Yeah, I think. Otherwise, I experience that mostly when I talk about transparency, for instance, right? Sharing materials and stuff like this, it seems very obvious for students. They are quite enthusiastic, and I think in many cases they are more sort of surprised that wasn't it always like this? You know, like that seems like the way you should do science, because otherwise, how can we trust anything if we don't know how it was done originally? So let's hope that this is where we're heading, that it becomes the norm.
Yeah, if I could just jump in as a student, Erik, a lot of what you're saying resonates. And I think like for relevance outside of academia as well, like open science is also a chance to, I felt for me as well, like understanding how to see the information presented, and like especially for HR, where, and I think open science is also, if there's anything about rebranding open science, it's like open communication as well. And I think like you lower the threshold for critique, you lower the threshold for asking questions. And I think like just getting the guts up to email an author, first author of a paper, and be like, I saw this code, I'm not sure what it means. Can you please explain it to me? I think like learning how to communicate with people you've never met, or to ask them questions about information they've presented without it being maybe taken as just critique, but also like asking to understand, I think is a really good skill to learn for anything, like in academia or not. And if HR, you kind of become master communicators and dialogue people. And if you want to be a point person, like this is also really important on, I don't know if you can write like on a CV, I wrote an email to to an author, but more like understanding questions and being able to use this dialogue, I think is something that's kind of underrated as a soft skill nowadays.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, perhaps I can very briefly add. I mean, higher education teaching is about competencies, and open science or transparency is giving people the competency to reflect upon how transparent do our processes need to be, how reproducible do they need to be to create value either in the scientific community or for my company. And I mean, very simple process perhaps don't need to be transparent because there's always a cost also associated with transparency. That's also something that people can learn. And there is some criticism about the open science movement and everything else, that there may be a challenge also for marginalized groups, that this may impose a cost upon them that is perhaps not carried by other populations, like white, privileged, male, older people. They may have an easier time fulfilling this role because they can invest into this. So it's these things. This is, I think, what students can learn beyond the university setting. I mean, it's good to have a transparent paper because you create value for the community, but it's also to weigh the costs and benefits about transparency in processes. And transparency is also important within companies. I mean, in companies, we don't have to open up everything to the public, but at least create transparency and within the company so that we can have auditing processes and so forth. This is very much valued in pharmaceutical companies, for example. To make something auditable is really a great feat that students can learn.
Thank you so much. This does remind me of one thing, and that is that or especially what you said, Nora. I hear from a lot of, or at least some PhD students, that it can be very scary to go transparent. Well, my data will be there, my code will be there. What if I've made a mistake? That's going to make me look bad. And you already have this imposter syndrome where you kind of feel like you're not an expert, obviously. So for PhD students or other early career researchers who feel like that, what would you kind of say to them to motivate them to go for open science?
To motivate them, I think, yeah, I just practicing is a lot, and I think also like not just with code, but there's always a better way. There's always a more sleek way to design, and I probably have like 20 lines, for example, of code that just would be so much easier to do in one for people who are experts. But I think yeah, like again, I think going back to the core of, it doesn't really matter what it looks like, but what is your process behind it? What have you thought about behind it? And I think kind of just changing the mindset to be like, okay, well, what do I want to be, if you use the word judged by, or how do I want to be seen? Is it the thought behind it, or can you explain this behind? And I think that was something that I often looked at, like, and really helped with writing the registered report. And I think stage one is, I think Erik mentioned before, there's a lot of times where in this classroom setting that you hear concepts for the first time, and when you have to apply these and write why you're taking them into action, or for the stage one where you have to write the statistical pipeline, it really requires a kind of a deeper understanding of like why you're adding it, and not just writing down, you know, making a table that has the most amount of squares to look impressive. I think understanding where it's coming from, and with open science, it's really, I think what can be communicated as well is that, you know, open science, it's less of a library and more of like a platform for ideas, kind of like GitHub, where you have this lower, or, you know, Stack Overflow, where people are asking questions all the time. And I think communicating that it's a platform to learn from each other instead of to present your ideas, then it kind of lowers this. It feels more like a drawing board instead of like a conference.
We agree. Thank you so much, Nora. Erik and Ulf, what would you say to those who feel very doubtful about having everything out there in the open?
Me?
No, Erik and Ulf. Sorry. Erik,
I'm thinking, I don't know what, I don't know, like, I think, yeah, I think like there was lots of comments from Gerrit here in the chat that I think are good examples of what you could say, right? Like knowing, asking is a sign of strength, basically, right? Or smartness. Yeah, I think in many ways it touches upon the best principles of learning, right? Learning from mistakes and getting feedback from others. That's like core principles of learning and becoming better. So I think you just have to spend some time on convincing students of the value of this. But it might be a hurdle for people. I find that it can be hard even to convince them to send draft papers in some courses and get voluntary feedback on it, because they are scared of getting critique. And I say, well, you're going to get critiqued when you get your grade either way. So it's better to get the feedback before, when you have a chance to do something with it. And still many people are afraid of it. So just take time and try to help the effective reactions would be my tip.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think convincing people, I mean, you can convince them by having a method of bringing these techniques. I mean, Nora, you did this great. I mean, you just jumped in and did the whole Monty right from the start. You did the registered report and everything else. But there are other ways. So, for example, pre-registration. So what we tell our students, because they often are in environments that are not very supportive of those ideas. I mean, a first way to do a pre-registration is to draft a Word document that you share with your supervisor and that you put into an electronic lab notebook so that it has an electronic timestamp. So you can go back and revisit it. Of course, it's not the same as pre-registering something openly, but we'll have to map out like a tiered approach, how people can get to the goal. For example, if the goal is that you write down your thoughts in a transparent and rigorous way, just as you do in a registered report, this may be one of the first steps that you could take. And then the next step would be, okay, now I feel more comfortable with it. I can go to the OSF and pre-register. Oh, now I feel more comfortable, and I even know exactly what I want to do, because I do just like Gillard said, I do a replication. And I exactly know what I want to do in this replication. So now I can aim for the registered reports, which is not so suitable for other type of research. So we cannot go to tell all the wet lab researchers at Charité to do registered reports for every cell line experiment that they do, which would be total madness. Nobody would want to do this, because they're changing their protocols even from day to day, and rather tracking how they change their protocols is already adding to the transparency. It also depends a bit on the field, I guess, on what we can expect from researchers and how to change the system. And for me, it's, as I said, it's not openness, but it's what kind of techniques will actually, in what kind of extent, create value for the community, for the scientists. And well, Charité University Hospital, in our special case, particularly creating value for the patients at the end of the pipeline.
I really appreciate what you say, Ulf, and I agree as well that it's not normal, or it's not a given that everybody will jump in. But I think like with the pre-registration, and one thing that helped me as well is to just like dedicate some time to just look at other people's pre-registrations, because then you realize like, okay, not everything is done and published on others. And I think sometimes this helps as well to see that there are drafts, so to speak, that exist published on the internet, open for other people to read. And I think like understanding that, yeah, and it's kind of goes maybe chicken and egg, because there need to be people putting this out for others to see. But I think the more you just realize that there exist others out there that have kind of, yeah, unfinished drafts published on the internet, it helps. It helped me at least to just, yeah, start a page or something.
Thank you so much. Another question I have is, I feel like early career researchers, and especially PhD students, they're usually at the forefront of pushing for open science and reproducibility and replications. But of course, all of that comes with extra time and effort, right? That they choose to invest in because they care about it. I'm wondering what educators and institutions can do to help PhD students in their efforts to implement open science practices and reproducibility in their research. And we can go with any order.
Yeah, well, institutions can sign COARA, the Coalition for Assessment of Research, or advancement of the research assessment, and make good plans to do this. But of course, we are in an international competition, and I mean, if somebody needs to publish in Nature because they want to go to Harvard, I mean, what can we do? It's very hard. It's very hard in this international competition to give good guidance to students. You can rather tell them what their option set is, and that within this option set, one of the ways is that to increase transparency and to invest time here, but also to kind of do a bit of bed hedging so that the quality of the research is higher, that the thoughts that went into the research. And of course, transparency is one of those things, but I mean, it would be ill-advised. We here at the BRH Quest, of course, we live in a bubble, but our students, perhaps they want to go somewhere else, and the rules are still different. So everybody at some point has to decide where on this large scale, where do they want to go with transparency, and how much time do they want to invest, and also how bold are the claims. Yeah, so very bold claims need very substantial transparency in everything else. We see this in clinical trials. I mean, there's no clinical trial that is not pre-registered. But it's a useful pre-registration. It's entirely different than what psychology does. And we also have to think there's recent attempts in animal experiments to do such a pre-registration. But it's not taking off because it's too complicated. It's not mandatory yet, and it's a very complicated process to do because it orients very much at the psychological pre-registration templates. And I think this is too complicated for the researchers, and it should be a bit more like the clinical trials one, where we weed out the main things, because in clinical trials, the main thing that you don't want is outcome switching. Yeah, and this is, you just tell us your primary outcome variable, and that's fine. And how you will do the analysis, very, very briefly. So go to clinicaltrials.gov, and these pre-registrations look entirely different from what psychology does. So I think, yes, we should encourage, and we should encourage institutions to also evaluate researchers differently, but still there are, even with all the open science, there are some research questions that are more important than others. And also some research that is of higher quality, even though it's not transparent. That's also true. I mean, it's one puzzle piece. And the question now will be how to integrate those.
Thank you, Ulf.
I think to help the PhD students, you start at an earlier stage, basically, right? All PhD students have been bachelor and master students before, so it already helps when you have it integrated there. But I think that what we talked about at an earlier stage, and to have an open science course for PhD students would also be good, right? Or to integrate it into methods teaching for PhD students. That would definitely help, if nothing else, to be aware of the opportunities that they have, right? And I think it's important to like it's a cost, right? It's an opportunity cost to invest your time and effort in learning those practices. But I think like I have no doubt that this is a good investment in the long run. It will pay off. So that's something that one can say, at least to those who are interested.
Awesome. Thank you, Erik. My final question to all of you is, how do you see the future of open science and reproducibility in higher education, let's say 5 years from now? What do you think our main challenges will be then? What have we solved by then that we're trying to solve now? And if we can perhaps go with you, Ulf.
Perhaps Nora wants to go first, because
Sure, absolutely.
What I want to see in 5 years. When yeah, I think making it like dedicate time. I think like you were saying, Erik, that I think time as part of a coursework to just sit down and create a page, or just kind of play around with learning what it is like to press publish and to do this. I think this is really valuable, and I think kind of what we talked about before is that thinking about the time spent, kind of understanding, and if you were to say, like, so to speak, like building the ship and really having like a sound structure, I think I hope that this will change, or kind of hopes that, for example, me going into a PhD now, that and kind of understanding that just because I've worked with 2 people who have been really positive towards open science and giving me the chance to write a registered report for the thesis, doesn't mean that this will be the case for everybody that I meet. And I think feel quite lucky to feel like I can be an advocate for wanting to do this and setting aside the time to do this in the beginning. But I think that my hope as well is that looking at in principle acceptance will have maybe just as much weight as a traditional publication, I guess. Like stage 1 acceptance is looking at, yeah, not just kind of a waiting period, or as like a almost accepted, but having it be just as valuable as acceptance. And I think in terms of results, that we can look at maybe a change of mindset, where just like producing work that has some sort of significance, traditional significance, is not, will be maybe looked at a bit more critically. And I also hope that we, or myself as well as a student, or in 5 years when hopefully I'm done, that I will be able to look back and, you know, be able to have this open map, and to be able to reflect on, like you were saying, Ulf, the timestamp, like, oh, look at 5 years ago when this was the, you know, this was the stage it was at, to be able to reflect on kind of the stages that have come before then. But yeah, and hopefully that more people will be jumping into this open science, or pre-registration, I guess I should say as well. I think that's a really good first step.
Thank you, Nora.
Yeah, I mean, Gilad also already hinted at the advent of AI coming up. And I think a lot of things will change, or will make open science easier. I'll give you one example. So, for example, I I was a bit skeptical about pre-registrations, but of course, if AI can help us, for example, compare the manuscript that is submitted to the pre-registration in a sensible way, so that reviewers do not have to spend so much time on switching forth and back between the pre-registration and the actual manuscript. This would help tremendously, saying, okay, there's no, because pre-registrations are only useful if they're used in the review process. And I think taking this on board and taking competencies, teaching competencies, actual competencies, and there are very, very strong competencies linked to open science, reproducibility, and transparency. Teaching these competencies, and this is also what Gilad said, I mean, we have to teach them how to do the scientific process. It's no longer about accumulating knowledge, and we will not have book exams anymore. Everything is changing. People will no longer be graded upon an essay that they write at home. This is what, there's a major change now in education and how education is done, and we should be a lot more interested now into the thought processes, into advancing the thoughts, and this is certainly something that AI cannot do, theory building. I mean, this is what we should focus on, and here open science and transparency can be one or two of the components that we can take into our teaching for the competencies to also convey how we reach a result. And this, I think this will change, and I'm pretty confident that this will change also with the use of AI techniques.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But I'll first say that I don't think any of us can predict with any confidence how it will look in 5 years. If I think back to how much things have changed in the last 10 or 12 years, it's crazy how the landscape has changed. And I think the safest prediction to make is that it will continue changing in approximately the same direction. I don't think we can sort of close the floodgates now. There's a movement towards open science, and we saw this UN example that Gilad showed earlier. So there's a movement going on. But I think that I totally agree with what Ulf said here, and I think that as AI will make data analysis possibly much more available for everyone, knowing what's the right question to ask is even more important. And I think that open science can be a key to knowing what's the right question to ask, basically, right? If you don't have access to how a study was done, if you don't have access to data coding and stuff like that, then how can you assess it, and how can you know which question to ask? So I think that's my very general prediction. Perfect.
Thank you so much. We have reached the end of the panel discussion now, so we're ready to take questions from the audience. If you just raise your hand or write in the chat, I'll take a look in the chat now and see if there's anything in here. There's a lot of activity in the chat, which is really good. I don't think I'm seeing any questions unless I'm missing them in the chat.
I guess I have a question.
Yes, please.
For everyone, and for maybe Ulf and Erik. That's like when you are deciding, you kind of with the pre-registration, and you are deciding kind of at what point to publish a pre-registration, is there any discussion within a group, or is there any wider discussion, or is this also talked to with students? Like, at what point you can consider ideas to be published, or is this part of the discussion? I think, speaking from personal experience, it's helpful to know, kind of going into it, like at what point would you consider it open for pre-registration, and what are kind of the key points? Like, we talk a lot about kind of the questions are being asked are really important, but kind of what are those, what points have to be kind of covered before you feel this pre-registration can be hung into the internet or put up in the internet?
I think that's a really good question, and I'm equally curious, and I'll leave that to Ulf and Erik.
Well, I can, since pre-registration is not made to make you inflexible, I think you can pre-register basically whatever you like. Just make clear what has changed. I mean, it's about the transparency of your thought process. It's not to deliver some kind of document where you show how clever you were, but rather document where you show, okay, this is where I started, and this is where it all ended up. I mean, that's fair enough, I guess. And perhaps we'll need then some kind of confirmatory step later on. And as I said, how bold, if you have a very bold claim, well, you can just go ahead, and perhaps you test this differently. You said you use Bayesian statistics instead of inferential one, but perhaps you even switch the primary outcome variable because you think that it's no longer suitable. But this then you have to make transparent at least. And I think pre-registration is just about transparency of your thought process. And this may be interesting for some people to just see how your thoughts evolved along the way. So I think in my group, there's no discussion what should be pre-registered. Of course, we discuss a lot of those projects before we actually engage in conducting a study or simulations or whatever we do. But yeah, pre-registration is can be done at any point and even be updated. I mean, OSF is, I think, giving you the opportunity to update your pre-registration.
Yeah, I guess speaking from personal experience, I changed from inferential to Bayesian statistics after we had received the first round of edits and decided to make this change ourselves. So it was good practice in like writing why. Like, actually, by the way, you accepted our traditional statistical pipeline, but we want to change it completely. So yeah, it's interesting to reflect on.
And if I remember correctly, Brian Nosek asked on Twitter, I think on just jokingly, whose pre-registration matches the actual manuscript?
I totally agree with everything Ulf said, but I would also like to stress that it is a judgment call that you have to make, right? I think that we want to have the pre-registrations as good as possible and to have thought about all potential issues that will arise. But still, I sit right now and I'm pretty annoyed because I have working on a paper where we pre-registered some things and we did not pre-register the things that I now think are the most interesting. So that's that can happen. It's annoying, but I will just report it as it is.
I think, Nora, no matter what we do, we'll always feel super stressed when we have to click that submit button. There's no fighting that anxiety, at least in my case. But yeah, thank you so much. I think that concludes the panel discussion. Thank you.
Agatha has one more question. Do you see
sorry. Yeah, there we go. Go ahead, Agatha.
So maybe that will be the sort of quick last point before we conclude. That we talked quite a lot about registered reports, and I think Leif had a really important point in the chat. I don't know if everybody has a chat in front of them because some people here are physically, some are remotely, but he said that information about which journals offer registered reports should be available, for example, on the directory of open access journals, the DOAJ, and we send a bunch of links to where this information is available. But I think it's a really important point that, yeah, this information should be available on some more, not only on Center of Open Science own list, but somewhere in a directory of academic journals or open access journals or any sort of official directory that people use to publish, right? And to find journals to publish. And I don't know if anybody knows if this information will be at some point available on these types of lists or directories, because I think it would be really, really useful.
I think there's just if I can step in for a sec, there's a little bit of a gap between a journal claiming that they will support register report and them actually being able to do that effectively. So there needs to be a little bit of, not an oversight, but somebody who really, like if a journal claims that they do this, that they know how to do this and that they really accept those, so you just don't waste your time. So I think this is what the Center of Open Science has been trying to do, and peer community in register report is trying to do. But definitely, I think the aim is, once this is well established, that this will be public knowledge and everybody can access this, for sure. This is the goal.
Thank you, Gila.
Thank you for everything. This was lovely.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gila, for the keynote talk. Super, super interesting. And it was a perfect segue into the panel discussion, of course. Thank you, Ulf, Erik, and Nora. This has been super, super exciting and fun for me, at least, and I hope everyone else enjoyed it as much as I did.